All right, so over the last couple of weeks, we've been having this conversation as to whether or not Joe Biden's administration and the Democratic Party is going to follow through on one of his largest campaign promises, which was the $15 minimum wage. So we've also been talking about how the $15 minimum wage by 2025, which is Joe Biden's plan, really isn't enough if minimum wage had just kept up with inflation and productivity since around 1968, which is when they became detached. Then right now, today, it would be at around $23, $24 an hour. So even saying $15 minimum wage by 2025 is a deep compromise on this issue. But the least that you could do in this situation is fight relentlessly for that deep compromise. And so the question has kind of been whether or not Democrats and Joe Biden are willing to do that. We've seen obstacles pop up along the way, like conservative Democrats like Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, who have come out opposed to the $15 minimum wage, and they've used their bullshit arguments, and we've talked about that and dissected it in the past. And my biggest criticism of Joe Biden and his administration is, look, if you have obstacles that are standing in your way, like members of your own party, it's on you as the president of the United States. It's on you as your party leader to get your party in line, to take that fight publicly if need be, to apply maximum pressure to the things and the obstacles standing in your way. And that's how we would know that you actually legitimately believed in that promise that you made. If you fight relentlessly for it and you lose, well, okay, that's fine. We can accept some losses along the way as long as we know that you're relentlessly fighting for it. But I have a perfect example right now of how Kamala Harris, within Joe Biden's administration, is not fighting for the $15 minimum wage, as we have a situation where Kamala Harris basically unilaterally could fight to include this in the $1.9 trillion COVID stimulus package, and she, along with Joe Biden's administration, are simply choosing not to. So Ronald Klain says Harris would not overrule a parliamentarian on minimum wage increase. So basically, there's this position, the Senate parliamentarian, that gives advice on certain things. And right now, the Senate parliamentarian has just given advice. Again, this is not an official ruling or a declarative thing that must 100% be followed. Gave an advisory position that the $15 minimum wage would not be or could not be included under the budget reconciliation process that Democrats are using to pass this stimulus bill. So as Bernie Sanders pointed out, that alone, that claim from the parliamentarian that this somehow doesn't fall under the purview of budget reconciliation in that process, in and of itself should be disputed. That's not even necessarily accurate. We've seen with historical precedent that things that are less related to the budget have been included in the budget reconciliation process before. This would not be something that's, incredibly out there or that wouldn't be relevant to the budgetary processes. It absolutely would. So beyond that, beyond just the inaccuracy of what the parliamentarian is deciding in this circumstance, Kamala Harris, as the president of the Senate, has the ability to completely go around this. But here's their statement on what they're planning to do here. So White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain said the administration would not try to overrule the Senate parliamentarian if she decides an increase in the minimum wage would be or must be stripped from a coronavirus relief package. Quote, certainly that's not something we would do. We're going to honor the rules of the Senate and work within the system to get this bill passed. Guys, first of all, Republicans would never do this. Could you even imagine Mitch McConnell or a Donald Trump or any Republican coming out and saying, oh, we were going to try to do this thing that's part of our agenda, but you know what, I guess this parliamentarian, they advised us not to, we give up. They would absolutely, they've shown us over and over and over again, and I have a specific example for you here on this specific issue with the Senate parliamentarian, of Republicans just ignoring every single rule and norm in place in order to accomplish their agenda. So if you're the Democratic Party, you have to do the same thing if you actually care about passing your agenda, but they're simply choosing not to take on that fight. Here's another confirmation of that. White House National Economic Council Director reiterates VP Harris won't overrule the Senate parliamentarian. The vice president is not going to weigh in and says we'll respect that process. Here's another thing. Nobody, absolutely nobody, who would be affected by the $15 minimum wage increase, these workers who are being exploited, who aren't earning enough right now, none of them give a single shit how you pass the $15 minimum wage. It is an overwhelmingly popular policy. 67% of the country supports this policy. You do it however you can do it, and the negative consequences of that are going to be minimal. Nobody who would be affected by this gives a shit how you pass it. Just pass it. That should be the mindset that Democrats are taking on, but it's absolutely not. And just to give you a historical perspective here on how Republicans have done the exact thing that I'm talking about right now, here's an example. In 2001, Republicans took a drastic step after a series of rulings went against their plans. The Senate was evenly split at the time, with the GOP holding a razor-thin majority thanks to recently elected Vice President Cheney and his tie-breaking vote. So sounds pretty similar to the situation that Kamala Harris is facing right now. Republicans tried to usher tax cuts through Congress under budget reconciliation process that allows the Senate to move legislation forward with a simple 51 majority rather than the 60 votes normally required to avoid the filibuster. That's another point really that we should be getting into, is that Democrats don't want to abolish the filibuster. If you abolish the filibuster, you wouldn't even have to be going through the budget reconciliation process in the first place. So you absolutely should be abolishing the filibuster as well. But if you don't want to do that, then you do this. But then Senate parliamentarian Robert Dove ruled that most of the tax cuts and a measure creating a $5 billion fund for natural disaster damage could not be considered using the reconciliation process. He was promptly dismissed by the Secretary of the Senate at the behest of then Majority Leader Trent Lott, and Minority Leader, the Senate top Democrat at the time, called the firing very disappointing but and extremely harmful to the process, but did not say very much else. So literally fired them. The Senate Majority Leader basically pressured to fire the parliamentarian for this ruling. They could do that same thing. Why couldn't they do that same thing? Republicans have done it before. So if the parliamentarian is advising you not to do this, you could fire the parliamentarian. But again, you don't even need to. You could just ignore them. Here's Ro Khanna. The Constitution gives the Vice President the power to decide whether the $15 minimum wage can pass through reconciliation. The parliamentarian's opinion is advisory, which VPs have disregarded before. Do not let anyone tell you that we do not have the power to pass a $15 minimum wage. Another take from Ro Khanna. I'm sorry, an unelected parliamentarian does not get to deprive 32 million Americans the raise they deserve. This is an advisory, not a ruling. VP Harris needs to disregard and rule a $15 minimum wage in order. We were elected to deliver for the people. It's our time to do the job. So this is squarely falling on the shoulders of Kamala Harris right now in this moment. She has the power to simply ignore this advice. It's really literally that simple. She can just, as the president of the Senate, ignore the advice of the parliamentarian. They are choosing to accept the advice of the parliamentarian. And what does that tell you? It tells you they don't give a shit about increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. That was a lie on the campaign trail, because when push comes to shove, and you have the power in order to enact this and include this in this bill, you choose not to do it. And this is a big telling moment here for Kamala Harris. When she unilaterally in this moment has the power to do this, you know, if she has presidential hopes in 2024, give them up right now, because you're not going to do it if you're not even willing to fight for a $15 minimum wage when you have the opportunity to. And even if you didn't want to just simply ignore the parliamentarian, as David Serrato and Andrew Perez for the Daily Poster pointed out here, there's another way that they can go about this. Ultimately, it's the Vice President of the United States, said former Senate parliamentarian Robert Dove in a 2010 interview about such matters, quote, "It is the decision of the Vice President whether or not to play a role here, and I have seen Vice Presidents play that role in other very important situations. The parliamentarian can only advise. It is the Vice President who rules." At the time, the Huffington Post explained that a Vice President can choose whether or not to accept the parliamentarian's decision or rule. That ruling is subject to appeal, but the appeal is decided by majority vote. In a new memo circulating to lawmakers and obtained by the Daily Poster, Harris's power as the presiding chair of the Senate is spelled out, citing a precedent set during the Clinton administration. Quote, "It would take 60 votes to overturn the ruling of the chair on a Byrd rule, point of order, regardless of what the parliamentarian advises. Based on a search of congressional record, it appeals that only twice has the chair's ruling on the Byrd rule been a point of order been appealed. Both instances occurred on August 6, 1993, during the consideration of the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1993. Neither appeal garnered the 60-vote affirmative necessary to overturn the chair's ruling." So you have multiple options here, Kamala Harris. You can either simply ignore the ruling of the parliamentarian and move forward and say, hey, no, this is fine. We can include this in the budget reconciliation process. And then what may happen is you may have somebody else who appeals that decision by Kamala Harris, but that person making the appeal would then need to pull together 60 votes to override Kamala Harris's decision. That is not going to happen. I don't think that you would be able to get 60 votes in the Senate to go against the $15 minimum wage, affirmatively taking a stance against the $15 minimum wage. I might be wrong, but I don't think that that's actually going to happen. So the choice here is very simple, okay? It's on Kamala Harris's shoulders. If she and the Joe Biden administration actually believe in the promise of a $15 minimum wage, like they said that they did, this is the moment that will tell you whether or not they were lying this entire time. Because again, Kamala Harris 100% has the power to decide whether or not to ignore the parliamentarian or to take the advice of the parliamentarian. The $15 minimum wage is on Kamala Harris's shoulders. If you don't want to lose in 2022, if you don't want to lose in 2024, do the fucking bare minimum.